Islam is unlike most other religions, and contrary to popular thought, it is not like Christianity and it's not like Judaism, even though Muhammad plagiarized many elements of both religions at the beginning of his career as a spiritual leader and before concocting his own religion upon becoming a warlord and changing his tune. The notion that Islam is a beautiful and peaceful religion, the way Obama, Bush, Trudeau, Merkel, Schulz, Macron, and countless many other world leaders on both the political left and right have insisted for decades, and the notion that Islamic extremism and terrorism are somehow a perversion of Islam simply does not pass scrutiny. It's actually quite the opposite. Millions of Muslims are peaceful in spite of and not because of their religion. Millions of Muslims are peaceful because they are either just nominally Muslim, know next to nothing about their own religion, and having been born onto the religion because they had the opportunity to grow up in a civilized Western country, they don't abide by its numerous rules, including those pertaining to the bad and even criminal treatment of infidels. Or they cherry-pick their religion to make it more palatable for themselves and their Western audiences. In reality, Islam is a religio-political totalitarian, authoritarian ideology characterized by its intolerance and theologically and legally justifiable violence against non-Muslims, its xenophobia, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, and as though that weren't enough, socially accepted and theologically justified rampant pedophilia and animal cruelty. Islam is therefore thoroughly and irreconcilably incompatible with the values of Western civilization, and it's high time that we say these verifiable truths without fear of offending Muslims. The childish Western myth of the religion of peace has to die by being exposed as the lie that it is before our Western civilization dies at the hand of Islam. Welcome to another episode of American Reconquista. I'm your host, Emilio Pons, and I am joined tonight by Dr. Amin Nayebpour. He will introduce himself a little bit, but I can already tell you that this is going to be a very interesting and potentially explosive episode.
Thank you for the introduction, Emilio.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here.
Sure. So, Amin Nayebpour. My background is Iranian, Persian, as they say here. I was born there, grew up there, and did my university there. And then I ended up studying philosophy at St. Louis University, and then in New York, New School for Social Research, and then obtaining my PhD from Freiburg University in Germany.
Mm-hmm. What are your degrees in general?
So my bachelor's, my first one is in mathematics, what I studied in Iran. And then I got the other bachelor in theology and philosophy from St. Louis University. And then philosophy from New School, which I concentrated mostly on political philosophy. And then my doctorate also concentration on political philosophy of Leo Strauss and Farabi. Mm-hmm. So that was the topic of my dissertation, how Leo Strauss read Farabi and how he diagnosed the problem, which he would call the political theological problem.
Okay, so I guess that we can assert the fact that you are well acquainted with the topic at hand tonight, which is Islam, and the fact that Islam is undeniably one of the greatest threats to Western civilization that must be addressed immediately. And without further ado, I want to delve into the topic. So correct me if I'm wrong. I think that it's very, very important for Western audiences to realize that Islam is both a religion and a political ideology, because there is this built-in allergic reaction amongst Westerners to even remotely criticize any religion, particularly a religion that is professed by billions of people who happen to be primarily brown. And the reason is that a lot of Westerners, particularly Americans, Germans, Brits, and French and others, immediately misconstrue Islam to be a unmutable characteristic like skin color or race or sexual orientation. And therefore, they believe that they simply cannot criticize Islam. Again, because most Muslims aren't white Westerners. However, we need to insist that any political ideology should be subject to scrutiny, particularly when it's a political ideology that has left a record of violence and a death toll in the millions throughout the history of the world. What do you think?
I mean, first of all, it's freedom of expression. Everybody is free to say whatever they want. So whoever wants to say, don't talk about Islam because it's insulting them, I mean, tough luck. Life is hard. You're going to get insulted, so don't be a baby. So that's the first thing. But, it's important to know, it's what you said, Islam is political. And why do Westerners don't understand that? I think it's because they take Christianity as a paradigm of religion. What do I mean by that? I mean that Christianity, by and large, has been stripped down by its political claims, and it's really a religion of interior. It talks about your relationship with God and with your fellow, immediate community. So it's a faith.
Mm-hmm.
But Islam, it has that, but it also has a political dimension, which has a theory of governance, has a theory of social change, and has a theory of where a teleological theory of where the world ought to go.
Correct.
So that's what just makes it political, and it gives you like policies. You can actually have a state, an Islamic state, which we had ISIS, and enact policies based on the Sharia, not only the Quran, but also the whole tradition. It gives you how many % taxes you have to take, what are the punishments you have to do. It's all there. So you don't have that in the religions. I mean, you have it, but it's not taken serious anymore. So
Correct.
It's become, especially Christianity, it's an inner religion now. But Islam is not an inner religion. And it's also important to realize that Islam is claiming for itself that I am the last religion and I have the most complete religion.
Right.
So what does that mean? It means that I have the best things regarding your religion, your relationship with God, but also your relationship to your fellow human beings and the world.
Correct.
So once you have that claim, the first thing to think from a Muslim is, okay, I have the answers to everything.
Correct.
And that's dangerous.
Yes. So you brought up one of the many problems that I see surrounding the construction of Islam, right? So one of them being applying a Christian perspective to it, right? One could say that one could also apply a Jewish perspective to it as well, but I think that the Jews, through their closer contact to Islam and how badly they've been burned by it, are less idealistic and are a lot more realistic and pragmatic about it. But also, I would say to the point that you were making earlier, that there is one big difference between Christianity and Judaism that is not so different between earlier versions of Christianity and Islam, and that is that Judaism is not evangelical by nature, right? The Jews are not in a process of trying to evangelize to the rest of the world. They believe themselves to be the people of the chosen people of God, and they want to create the world and turn it into a better place and then attract other people if they want. So conversion into Judaism is possible, but it is not one of the salient features of the religion, and certainly not a priority for the Jews. Whereas for both Muslims and for Christians, trying to convince the rest of the world that their religion is true and that their religion is better and that it should be imposed whether you like it or not is a feature of both religions. Now, Christianity went through a very long process of Reformation and then the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and whatnot that turned Christianity on its head and took away the power of the church to have the final say also on temporal matters, on political matters, and gave actually the rise to modernity. The problem with Islam is that it has not gone through this process of reformation, and it cannot, for reasons that we will explore later, but primarily the fact that it considers itself to be the final, most perfect revelation of God. So if it's already perfect, how do you reform it? How do you make it better, right? So another problem is that we also apply a Western and humanist, universalist perspective to it. This is a secular version of what we just been saying about Christianity. Then there's also obviously the issue of political correctness and wokeism nowadays. That, you should not even remotely discuss Islam because, God forbid, you're going to insult a brown person. And that's a big taboo. We have also the political expedient grand pronouncements of politicians, again, on both sides. I'm not going to be dishonest. On both sides of the aisle, you have Bush, Clinton, Obama, everybody claiming that Islam is some beautiful religion and that it is tainted and perverted when it turns violent, which begs the question, well, why did Muhammad himself engage in battles, right? Why did he himself establish his the power on earth through force? If everything that is violent about Islam is not Islamic, then we get to the point where Muhammad himself and the Hadith and the Quran themselves are un-Islamic, which is logically impossible. We have also the problem of the conflation of religion with race that I mentioned earlier, which leads to the very, very stupid conclusion that criticizing Islam is tantamount to racially infused bigotry. The refusal to acknowledge that the claims made by Islamic theological sources, as well by scholars and followers of the religion, can be studied and analyzed objectively like any other comprehensive body of ideas. Also kowtowing to the ridiculous Muslim notion that the Quran is inaccessible and incomprehensible by definition to anyone who doesn't speak Arabic fluently. I mean, this is, I'm sure it's something that you've heard a billion times. And would you care to tell our audience that is unfamiliar with Islam, for starters, the big difference between the Arabic that you understand, which is classical Arabic, and the plethora of different dialects of Arabic out there in the world?
Sure. So you have the classic Arabic, which they call Fusha, which is the language of the Quran, and also all of the theological and philosophical treatises that were written, after in the Abbasid and Umayyad Caliphate. So that's what you say standard Arabic, or what the Germans say Hochdeutsch.
Yeah.
But you have also dialects throughout Syria, Levant, Lebanon, even North Africa, which is something else. Which is, North Africa, for example, you have a lot of Berber words in it.
Right.
And for me, who I know Fusha, I don't understand one word of what, I understand some words, but not all of them. When you come to Lebanon, you even hear French words inside.
Right.
So yeah, this notion of you have to know Arabic to know it. It's a claim that Quran makes itself. It's somehow It puts a barrier. You cannot know me,
right?
Because you don't know Arabic. Well, maybe in the 6th or 7th century that was true, but now we have ChatGPT.
Right. But also there's a reality of that would mean that a vast majority of Muslims would not be able to be true Muslims because a vast majority of Muslims are not Arabs.
Yeah.
Only 20% of the world's Muslim population is comprised of Arabs. And the most populous nation in the Islamic world is Indonesian, for whom Arabic is not their native language. Moreover, a lot of the Muslim population of the world is not particularly well educated. They may be able to recite by rote the Quran, but I'm pretty sure that they're not capable of really understanding classical Arabic if their native tongue is some dialect spoken in Morocco or some dialect spoken in Iraq, right? So that's one thing. And of course, it is absolutely preposterous to pretend that there is one piece of literature, of world literature, that cannot be translated when we can translate Shakespeare into Mandarin Chinese if we want to, right? Or we can translate the Popol Vuh or whatever into French. So this is complete nonsense. Another issue that we have is the failure to acknowledge or even be aware of the Islamic concept of Taqiya, right? That a lot of Muslims are actually actively engaged in a game of deceit when they talk about their religion, when they are in the presence of Westerners. And they are actually allowed and mandated by Islam to lie in order to preserve and advance their religion.
Yeah. And to lie about what? That's important, because you have an incident within the lifetime of Muhammad. So one of his disciples was being slashed by the bad guys, and he was not. And they were saying you have to deny the oneness of God. Oneness of God is a tenet of Islam. If you deny it, it's very bad. And the Prophet said you're allowed to even deny the oneness of God, Tawheed, which is a huge thing. I mean, if you say you're part of a apostate. So this is interesting. I mean, some maybe the viewers might think, okay, this is something you would think of, it was in the 7th, 6th century. No, they don't do like that. Let me give you an example of nowadays international relationships, international relations. If you read the memoirs of Muhammad al-Abode, he was the head of the IAEA at some point, the atomic agency. He writes in his memoirs that when he was talking to the Islamic Republic delegation, he said, according to your religion, and he's a Muslim himself, why are you lying about this stuff? Don't you think this is a sin? And the guy, his interlocutor, said, no, we're doing Taqiya. And right now we have these negotiations happening, and people in the West accept what the Islamic Republic is saying
at face value. Yes.
I mean, look, Muhammad al-Bardai, a Muslim, had that experience. Why aren't you learning from him?
Right.
So these are not antiquated issues. They're real, and
they have real repercussions in world politics right now. Absolutely. And this is another thing too. Is like this willful ignorance of people who, in spite of the fact that we now have more than 40,000 Islamic terrorist attacks of different proportions committed by Muslims in the name of Islam and in accordance to Islam since 9/11 alone, the vast majority of Westerners, and that includes, again, Latin Americans, North Americans, and Western Europeans, would prefer to just go, me, I didn't see, I didn't hear, I'm better off not knowing, because God forbid I find out the truth about Islam. And this is not going to end up well for us if we continue down this path. And this is why I think it's so important to take the risk, which it is a risk, to talk about Islam candidly and inform the general population. We can't afford to continue being all, Netflix and chill and live and let live when it comes to Islam, because there are plenty of Muslims, again, not all, but millions upon millions of Muslims whose sole set in life is to bring about an Islamic caliphate for the entirety of the world, because they see that as their primary obligation as devoted Muslims. And this brings you to one more topic or one more problem surrounding the construction of Islam in the West, and that is the failure to acknowledge that we are not all the same. First of all, we're not equally intelligent, we're not equally honest, not equally hardworking, etc., etc. But above all, when it comes to this clash of civilizations that we're seeing, we do not live by the same principles and certainly do not seek the same goals in life. And this is what irks me so much whenever I talk to anybody in the West, including my mother, who's always like, well, what is it to you? Just, leave them alone. Let them believe whatever they want. It's like, no, I can't, because they won't let me live however I want, right? Because they believe in this concept that I'm sure you can elucidate a little bit further, even though I'm familiar, obviously, with it, and which is not in the Quran, but it is part of Islamic theology, right? That the division of the world between Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb, right? The abode of Islam and the abode of war. Care to elucidate a little bit further?
Exactly. So, to your point, there was a video circulating in this neighborhood, Muslim neighborhood in Sweden, and this Swedish girl without the burqa was walking, and then this Muslim guy was telling her, put your, scarf, hijab on. And look, it's happening. We're not, crazy people telling you, oh, be careful. We have factual empirical evidence.
Correct.
Which goes back to this Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. So what does that mean? So it means that you live in this realm, this domain of Islam, which Islamic Sharia is being applied. Islamic Sharia, again, tells you what to wear, how to behave in the public.
It tells you even how to clean your ass after you've gone to the toilet. That's how far it goes.
It tells you it's better for you to walk into the toilet with the left foot, or that's how mundane,
prescriptive it is. How mundane, exactly.
And then there's this dollar hub, which means that, okay, even though maybe in the West you're not dominant and these Islamic laws are not being enacted in public, your duty is to enact it in your private life, of course, but also help these laws be enacted in public. Why? We have to ask why. Are these guys just, fanatics? Yes, but also, in order to have a private life, a good private life, you ought to also have your public life according to each together. If you live in one foot in an Islamic world and another foot in a non-Islamic world, at some point you're gonna become in a crisis. And Islam notices that and tells, okay, you have to try to apply your private to your public.
Right.
And of course, now Muslims are not majority in Western society, but they are trying to do that. And you're seeing it again, in Sweden that happened. I'm sure if you go to
Germany, in France, everywhere.
In France, in Paris, I think Saint-Denis, some things happening. But, again, we are not crazy people, trying to scare people. This thing is actually happening because people don't see it as a civilizational clash.
Right.
That's important. You have to see it as a civilizational clash.
Which it is. And it's not just, there's this very, very famous video on YouTube with Wafa Sultan, this super courageous woman who now lives in Canada, where she confronts an Islamic cleric on Egyptian TV. You can see this on Memory. And this guy, the presenter, the moderator, talks about the clash of civilizations, right? This very, very important book that might be here or might not be here. Anyway, written by Huntington. This one. Huntington, the clash of civilizations, right? And the remaking of world order. And she very accurately says civilizations don't actually clash, they compete, and they compete for hegemony. And this is what we're seeing right now. And it's really also just a numbers game. At the end of the day, when they outnumber us, they'll have every single possibility to change the laws to fit their worldview. We already are seeing this process, for example, in Belgium, where you have 25% of the population in Brussels, for example, is now Muslim. and where Muhammad is the most common newborn baby name, right? And where you are now seeing talk about the introduction of the first Sharia party for Belgium. This is craziness. This is completely antithetical to Western values, to Western civilization, and to the Western rule of law. And yet the Muslims know that they can infiltrate and then use our Western liberal institutions and turn them against us. We also saw it, for example, in Gaza, of all places, right? Where in 2008 they had elections for the first time, free elections that were sponsored to the tune of billions of dollars in investment and aid by the international community. And who do these people vote for? Hamas, knowing full well that it was an Islamic terrorist organization.
After the Arab Spring, if you
Yes.
remember, the leftist Western was cheering. This is about freedom. Okay, Mubarak goes.
Yeah.
And who do they elect? Mohamed Morsi.
Yeah.
One of the first things that Mohamed Morsi laws that puts in his cabinet
Yeah.
is a child mutilation.
Yes.
You circumcise girls.
Yes.
And and he was saying, I'm going to do this. He was
Yeah.
not like he was not being secretive about it.
Yeah.
He said, this is part of my position, my program, and they
Yes.
voted for it.
Yeah.
So,
The same thing you can say in Turkey, for example. Ataturk must be turning in his grave, seeing what Erdogan is doing, right? Who, by the way, was the big partner of Europe throughout the scandalous invasion of Europe that started when Angela Merkel decided to open the floodgates of hell to Europe in 2015. And, Erdogan, the dictator of Turkey, famously claimed, we don't even have to engage in jihad anymore. We will just outbreed the Westerners and the West will be ours. And that's exactly what's happening. And it's terrifying that people in the West, particularly the politicians of the left, are not objecting to this at all or are in total denial of these issues. It is preposterous. Then you see, for example, also, like you said, if we're talking about real statistics and real life consequences of this, we don't have to speculate about what's going to happen with the future of Islam in Europe when we already know, or with the new migrants that arrived 10 years ago, when we already know what happened with the Turks who arrived in the 1950s and 60s after World War II, and they were invited by the German government to rebuild the country. So we had a big, and I say we as a German citizen, we had migrants from Portugal, from Poland, from Spain, from Italy, blah, blah, blah. Within a few generations, they were all integrated. They all speak perfect German, are fully integrated into our social and legal system, etc., etc. Absolutely no problem. Why? Because they came from Christendom. They came from a Western background. And on the other hand, you have the Turks that never really integrated. And the proof is in the pudding. When in the late 2010s, there was a referendum regarding Erdogan that everybody knows is a sultan wannabe, right? And a very corrupt politician and a ruthless leader who has undone all the progress that Ataturk had set off with his secularizing campaign, and who has persecuted journalists, who has limited the rights of women, who has limited the rights of gays, etc. There was a referendum to determine whether he would remain in power or not. The stupid German government, back then still under Merkel, decided we should also have voting booths for the dual citizens of Germany and Turkey within our borders and see what happens. Well, guess what? 2/3 of these so-called German Turks that are so well integrated voted in favor of this Sultan wannabe, Caliph wannabe. I mean, this is ridiculous. This proves to you that these Germans, in spite of decades of profiting from a life in the Western world, have understood nothing, and I mean nothing, about what it means to be a Western individual with a Western mindset that respects the basic freedoms and prerogatives that Europe came up with after centuries of bloodshed. This is unfathomable to me.